Hi, this is Gary with MacMOST.com. Thinking of getting a new Mac with the smallest internal drive and then supplementing it with an external drive? Well, here's what you should know. So a common thing for people to do when buying a new Mac is to decide to get the smallest possible internal drive with a large external drive. And there's one major advantage to doing that, and that's cost. Apple charges an extreme amount for internal storage. For instance, here in the base Mac Mini, you only get 256 gigs of storage. If you want to go and double that to half a terabyte, you're spending $200. 1 terabyte is going to set you back $400, and 2 terabytes is going to set you back $800. That's a lot of money, and it's easy to see that you can get a 2 terabyte external drive for much, much less than this. And that's really the only reason to consider getting a big external drive is to save money. But it's a big reason. So if you decide to do that, there are some pretty major drawbacks that you should know about. There's also a good middle ground that is probably the best option for most people. So the first drawback is if you have a MacBook. Have a MacBook, you probably like that it's portable and it's easy to bring with you, whether it's from room to room in your home or to take with you to work or school or travel. But if you then get an external drive, now you're bringing both of these. And depending upon how you use this, you may actually have to have it connected all the time, even while it's sleeping, and be careful not to accidentally disconnect it. So it's going to make your MacBook far less portable by always having to bring this around. You may get used to it, but it definitely is a lot easier just to grab this than to grab the pair. Another great thing about MacBooks is their battery life, how long the battery lasts. But when you hook this up to it, this is using the battery too, so the battery won't last as long throughout the day. Another thing to think about. By the way, if you find these videos valuable, consider joining the more than 2,000 others that support MacMost at Patreon. You get exclusive content, course discounts, and more. You can read about it at macmost.com/Patreon. So the next drawback is speed. So one of the reasons that the drives in Apple's computers are expensive is they are very fast SSDs. SSDs have different speeds. And if you look online, like you can look at Amazon here and see what the deals are for today, and you can see there's a 2 terabyte SSD for less than $150. But if you look at the speed, it's just above 1,000 megabytes per second. Matter of fact, it says up to. So that's the maximum speed. The average speed is going to be much less. However, the average speed of Apple's internal drives are much faster than that. They don't publish the speeds, but people know it through doing benchmarks. And it's typical, even on the lower end, to find 3,000 megabytes per second, and on the upper end to go to 6,000 or 7,000 megabytes per second. So you definitely have a big speed difference. And the difference is going to be caused partially by the connection, especially if it's a USB that you're connecting to your Mac with. It'll be better if it's Thunderbolt. Thunderbolt's going to be faster. But also, there's the speed of the internal parts of the SSD. They will typically be slower as well. You can do better by using a faster drive. So you can go up in price a bit and you can see the up to speeds get a little bit better. You could even go with a Thunderbolt drive and you could see they get considerably better than this, but still probably less than what you're getting with the internal drive. And notice that the price has gone up quite a bit at this point. It's still going to be cheaper than getting Apple's storage, but the difference isn't going to be so much. A lot of times when people advocate getting external drives, they always talk about the cheap external drives and not the ones that will be closer at matching Apple's speeds. So keep in mind, while you'll be saving something, you may not be saving as much as you think if you want to try to keep performance at a premium. And speed can be important even for casual Mac users. For instance, here I am just looking at my photos, something a typical Mac user would want to do. And watch what happens when I scroll. Look at all of these photos here that I'm scrolling through. It's accessing a ton of data on the drive just doing this. I may find that it's not as easy to flip through my photos anymore with them on an external drive. If you're doing something like video editing, you may also find that storing the project on an external drive means your editing goes slower. Same thing for working with large sound libraries for music creation and other tasks. Here's another thing to consider. It's not easy to use an external drive for certain things on your Mac. For instance, your system is going to want to be on the internal drive. The same thing with your user folder, your home folder. In addition to that, using iCloud Drive, the cache for that, no matter how you have the optimized setting set, is going to be in your users folder, in your library folder there, and that's going to be on your internal drive. You've got two library folders, the one at the top level here, but also in your user folder, you've got a library folder there as well. It's usually hidden, but you can get to it by using Go, Option, and there's Library. And you're going to find applications store tons of data, including caches here. As these grow, you're going to lose space on your internal drive. Doesn't matter how big your external drive is. Even more important than that is something called swap. So this involves memory on your Mac. Yes, memory, RAM, and your storage or your SSD, they are intertwined. And this is how modern computer systems work. It's hard to understand it unless you know a little something about computer science. But basically, when apps use memory, there's high priority memory items and low priority memory items. The high priority ones are accessed all the time, and they're always stored in RAM. But the low priority ones don't need to take up space in RAM. They can be stored on the SSD, which of course, since it's Apple's internal storage, is pretty fast. Now I've got a lot of memory here in my Mac Studio, so looking in Activity Monitor under Memory, you can see I'm not using any swap right now, but it's fairly typical to actually see some swap used. While I'm probably editing this video, it'll probably be using more memory and then going over to swap. Swap memory on your internal SSD is used to speed things up. But here's the thing, if you fill up your internal drive, there's no room on it for this swap memory. So you want to leave a good portion of your internal drive empty so it can be used for this. If you get a small drive like a 256 gig drive, it's easy to fill that almost completely up with the system, with your library, with your applications, and with your files till there's almost nothing left. If you're using 240 gigs out of 256 gigs, there's really nothing available for swap memory there. And everything is going to slow down. And there's nothing you can do to put this swap memory on an external drive. Even if you could, it would be slower there. So I mentioned before that using an external drive instead of spending more money on internal storage is a good idea. But I've also given you a lot of downsides. That's because there's some bad ways to use an external drive and some good ways to use an external drive. There are two methods I consider pretty bad because they're difficult to maintain. One is booting from the external drive, and the other is putting your home folder on the external drive. That solves a lot of the problems I've talked about before, but it complicates things because probably the external drive is slower. So you're slowing down your entire Mac by doing that. But also, there's a lot to learn, a lot of difficulty in setting it up, and you have to continue to maintain it. As Apple has updated macOS, there have been difficulties for people who have booted from or put the user folder on an external drive. So if you're going to go that route, be prepared to spend a lot of time figuring out how to set it up, and then even more time in the future maintaining it so it'll keep working in future versions of macOS. And I know I'm going to get some people commenting here that it's not that hard and that's how they do it. But I think for casual users and home users, this is just not something you want to do. It's certainly something I don't recommend to anybody, and it's certainly something I don't do myself. I have better things to spend my time and energy on. Other bad ways to use the external drive are to put your applications there. A lot of people think doing that's a good idea because the applications take up a lot of space. But remember, when you run applications from an external drive, it's going to make the application run slower. And another thing people will do is actually put the files they're working on the external drive. But that's also going to slow things down. So let's talk about a better way to use an external drive. I think the main way to use it is to get a big enough internal drive to handle what you're doing at any given time. Use the external drive to archive old projects. Now, by archiving, I simply mean taking files that you're not using right now and putting them on the external drive. These could be documents that you have finished with for now, but you certainly don't want to delete them. So you move those to the external drive. The ones you're still working on, like your current projects or files that you update all the time, you keep those on the internal drive. This is in fact how I do it. I keep everything I'm working on my internal drive on my Mac Studio. I have a 5 terabyte external SSD. When I'm done with things, like say making this very video, it goes to the external drive because chances are I'm not going to need to work with it again. For all my old projects, like these videos or apps that I developed in the past, or any documents I'm working on that I'm finished with, I don't really need anymore, they go to the external drive where I can easily access them, but chances are I'm probably not going to need to work with them. An external drive is also a great place to store media. Like if you work with video or audio and you want to store lots of clips and things like that on the external drive, and you could just simply bring them to your internal drive before you use them in a project. And of course, if you've got a lot of data, like for instance, you have clients, whether you're an accountant or a graphic artist or whatever, you may want to store all of the files for all of your clients on the external drive. And when you want to work with them, you just temporarily bring that file to the internal drive, work with it there, and then move it back to the external drive when you're done. So a good middle ground that I suggest is never to go with this minimum configuration. It's just too small once you take into account your system, your applications, things in your library folder, and so on. You don't have much space left. But going to the next level up for $200 more will not just double your space, because the system and all that other stuff is still going to take up the same amount of space. Let's say if you had 100 gigs left over after that, well, going to this level means you now have 356 gigs available. So if you're really worried about the cost, I think this level is a really good one because it allows you to still have some flexibility on your internal drive and then use the external drive for archiving all the things you're not currently using. Or for some people that work with big files, like video files and such, going to this level here for extra $400 gives them plenty of space to do all sorts of different large projects. And then anything beyond this can then be stored on an external SSD. Another good option is to go to that 512 gig level and then use iCloud Drive's ability to optimize Mac storage. So this means that you can store a lot of stuff on iCloud Drive, which yes, of course, you have to pay for, but you can have, say, a terabyte of stuff in iCloud Drive, but only a fraction of that is stored on your Mac's internal drive. The rest you access on demand as you need it. It feels like you have a terabyte of space, even though you don't. And you have the same setting here in Photos. If you go to Photos, Settings, iCloud, you've got Optimize Mac Storage here, which will do the same thing. It'll store all your photos in iCloud and only store the thumbnails and the most recently accessed photos locally, and anything else just is there on demand. That's a great option, especially if you go back to thinking about MacBooks. You don't want to have an external drive like this that you have to carry around all the time. You can use iCloud Drive and iCloud Photos instead. And it's really easy for casual and home users to maintain that because there's really nothing to do once you turned on Optimize for iCloud Drive and iCloud Photos, and then you could just use your Mac and not have to worry about where files are stored. One last thing I want to mention, and that's backups. If you have a Mac with an internal drive and an external drive, make sure you're backing up both. You can do this with Time Machine. You want to get a very large Time Machine drive. Have your Time Machine drive back up both the internal and your external drive. Or if you use an online backup, make sure you have that online backup service backing up both your internal drive and that external drive. So there are some things to think about if you want to get an external drive to supplement a smaller internal drive on your new Mac. Hope you found this useful. Thanks for watching. If you liked this video, click the thumbs up button below to let me know. I publish new tutorials each weekday. Hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out.